Well, once again, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Tiger Club of Kansas City Zoom call. It is Tuesday, September 21st. Our guest today is college football analyst Gary Barnett. Before we get to Gary, I want to thank Darren Weidick, as always, for setting up the Zoom calls, and Paul Blackman and Barry Canner for lining up our speakers every week. Everybody live on this call has paid their membership fees to the club now, but if you're watching this on YouTube, we ask you to please log on to kctigerclub.com and join. Check out our webpage for a list of upcoming events and speakers, and on the status of our Tuesday meetings, which for the time being will continue on Zoom call. Hopefully, we'll eventually return to the flea market live. And also would like you to check out our sponsors and support them, because they generously support us. Finally, I want to remind you the KC chapter of the Mizzou Alumni Association will hold their Tiger Tailgate this Saturday at Carolyn's Pumpkin Patch in Liberty, starting at 4:30. The Mizzou Boston College game starts at 11. That will be on ESPN2. So we plan on the Alumni Association celebrating a win after that game. Well, again, I'd like to welcome Gary Barnett, former head coach at Northwestern and Colorado, and now the color analyst for the Colorado Buffaloes. Of course, Gary's a Mizzou grad, playing under Dan Devine, and he's been a regular visitor to the Tiger Club in person and on Zoom. Today, he joins us from his home in Colorado. Gary, thank you, as always, for making time to join us.
Well, I'm sorry we couldn't do this in person, but, this is second best, and we'll make the best of it. So eager to get started.
All right. Well, Gary, it's been a wild opening 3 weeks in college football. Lots of upsets. I counted 10 FCS teams that have won over FBS schools so far, including, I think, 5 victories over Power 5 teams. And Jacksonville State beat Florida State. That was a stunner. Montana beat Washington. What do you attribute these crazy results so far this year?
Well, Mark, I don't really know yet. I'm sort of looking at all of it. I know the first weekend, which, by the way, featured more top 25 ranked teams playing against each other for the first time since they've had an AP poll. And so that was an amazing first weekend just to get started that way. And then there were 11 major upsets that weekend. 9 of them were FBS teams getting beat by the group of 5 teams. So they were Power 5 teams either losing to FCS teams or to the group of 5 teams. So, you immediately look at that and go, wow, all of a sudden we got unbelievable parity. And I think to some extent that's true. I think you mentioned the craziness. In 3 weeks, it's been the hardest, and I pick on a couple of radio shows, and then I pick winners on a couple of radio shows, and then we do it on our broadcast. And I have no idea where to go. My wife is going to pick them from now on because I'm under 500, and I know too much, or I maybe I don't know enough, but it just seems like anything can happen any weekend. And sort of hope it's the sort of the natural forces in the universe that are causing us to sort of take a good look at our whole college scene while everything else is going crazy with NIL and teams leaving and going to a bigger conferences doing alliances. So, it just sort of seems it's saying maybe you shouldn't do all this all so quick, because there's quite a bit of parity out here right now. So I think there's been, as we discussed earlier, there were a lot of really good quarterbacks leave last year. And so you look at the schools that had quarterbacks leave, other than probably BYU, they're all not as effective as they have been. And then I think what's happened is with this transfer portal, that guys are thinking and seeing guys leave and getting to play right away and get on film, and all of a sudden they become guys that the NFL is looking at, rather than staying where they are, be second team, get a few reps, get a few plays every weekend. I think everybody at almost every position now is starting to feel like it's really more fun to go play anywhere than sit for a long time. And so I think you're seeing a lot of transfer portal, Division I, Power 5 players make moves down to 1, 2, maybe even 3 levels. And so they're making those levels a little better.
Fortunately, Missouri Tigers against their FCS opponent last week, Southeast Missouri took care of business and had a very decisive victory. Now they head to Boston College. Again, that game will kick off at 11 a.m. Central Time on ESPN2. This is the first ever meeting between the two schools. Eagles are under second-year coach Jeff Hafley, former defensive coordinator at Ohio State. They're 3-0, although it's a pretty light schedule so far, but shown they can run the ball, and stopping the run has been a big problem for the Tigers. What do you think of this matchup?
Well, you're right. They really haven't played anybody. And I mean, Colgate, UMass, and Temple don't exactly rank up there with opponents that, first of all, people want to go see. But I can tell you one thing, going into Boston College and I've coached there, it's a little weird. Chestnut Hill is a nice little town, and the stadium is nice. It's not a big stadium. The crowd is pretty good. Right next to it is their hockey arena, which is what they really like. But it's just interesting. It doesn't feel like it's a great football environment. And even though they've had really good teams through history, but so it's not like going into Auburn or going into Alabama or going into some of these places that the Missouri Tigers have been playing recently. So the matchup gets even more interesting and probably better for Missouri after Boston College lost their quarterback, Jerkovic. Through the first 2 games, he was killing it. And now he's replaced by a kid named Dennis Grosso. Grosso threw 15 times last week, completed 7 for a total of 59 yards. Now, that's a good sign for the Tigers. But they are, like you said, they're averaging over 200 yards a game running a football. And, that any matchup for Missouri right now is tough unless they can find a way to slow things down defensively. I mean, I don't think anybody wants to get into a whole year in the SEC of trying to outscore everybody else. And it is a little surprising given the experience of the new coordinator, Steve Wilkes, and given, the fact that Missouri is not without some players, but they have struggled, as you know, as everybody knows, both in the pass game and the run game, but most notably in the pass game. I know as I've watched, I saw the first 2 games. I didn't get to see the SEMO game, and even SEMO ran a lot of yards on them. What they put up. They put up a number of yards against SEMO, and 294 yards rushing or something like that. That is a lot of yards. And to me, somewhere something's got to change in there. And I know those coaches are working really hard to get it done, but they are very vulnerable to the run, and it just gets frustrating. And what happens is when you can run the ball at the belly of the defense, you demoralize the entire, not just the defense, but you demoralize your team. And, having that happen to you week in, week out, just makes it a hard mental thing to overcome. And so whether, I'm sure coaches are scratching their heads and putting together every possible scheme and trying to find out pressures that might work and ways to get an extra guy in the box and a number of things. They've got to find a way to slow the run down, or, it's going to be one of those years where you're going to have to outscore anybody that you beat. And you just don't want to get into that if you can avoid it. This is a game where that shouldn't happen. Boston College, it's like I said, with the new quarterback, not nearly as effective as Jerkovic. Run game stays the same. That shouldn't change much, except that you can probably afford to sell out an extra guy to that run stopping part of the defense because it doesn't look like they're going to be able to throw the football on you. Now they got two receivers that are averaging over 21 yards a catch, and that's big time, but it was a different guy throwing to him. And, if you can run the football, then it really opens up the pass game. So their pass game is going to open up. But my guess is that Missouri is going to find a way to get that box clogged up and find a way to slow the run game down and take their chances in the pass game.
Missouri currently a 2-point favorite last I checked. Going to be an interesting game. On offense, the Tigers have shown some ability. What are your thoughts about the performance of Connor Basilak so far this season?
Yeah, I really like him. I liked him last year. We'll trade you and give you two defensive linemen for Basilak if you want to trade us right now at Colorado. And we'll have him there by this weekend, I promise. But now I've really been impressed with him. He's 9 touchdowns, one interception. Those are great numbers. He just sits back there and he's got a great delivery. He's very confident. You can tell that football team believes in him. I think he's as right now, when you look around the country and see who's really playing well, there's a couple that are really playing well. Matt Corral at Ole Miss is playing great. The kid at Alabama is playing pretty good for a young guy. But Basilak is putting up as good a numbers as anybody, and he looks as good as anybody out there. And then I'll tell you, Tyler Beatty, wow, is that a threat? Leading receiver, leading rusher. I mean, he's just an all-around great football player. And you got quite a weapon when you can throw the ball to him and let a guy who can run like that have the ball in space. And then you can also hand it off to him and have him get between the big boys and make big yards. So those two in combination they're a great combination. 513 total yards a game. Those are good numbers that Missouri's putting up. So I like him a lot.
Talking with college football analyst, former head coach at Northwestern and Colorado, Gary Barnett. If you'd like to ask Gary a question at the end of our discussion, please use the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. And of course, Gary can be heard every Wednesday in Kansas City on the Border Patrol with Nate Bukaty and our buddy Stephen St. John. A must listen, Gary. How many games do you watch in a week? Because you really seem to have a handle on what's going on around the country.
Well, I'll tape about 15 to 20 games a week, and I don't get through all of them, but I always tape the opponent of who we're going to play next. I always tape the Missouri opponents. I usually tape Nebraska opponents because I do a radio show in Nebraska. I tape Missouri, Kansas, and Kansas State games. There's not much sense in doing the Kansas games. And then I just keep up with the rest on, all the great games that are out there. I tape. I did get to see the Auburn game at Penn State this week just because I think everybody should put a whiteout at Happy Valley on their bucket list. It's one of the greatest atmospheres in all of college football, and as many great atmospheres as there are in the SEC, this one is right up there with. It's a tie for number one in my opinion. And I got to coach there, not in a whiteout. Didn't start till 2004, but I didn't do a whiteout. But I did games there afterwards in whiteouts, and it's breathtaking. So I got to watch that. So all in all, Mark, I got probably 20 games going at one time.
Games from last week, couple that stood out to me. First of all, Florida, Alabama. Alabama looked almost invincible the first 2 weeks and first half against Florida. But you take away the missed extra point, and that might be a completely different game. What were your thoughts on that game?
Well, just like you, as I've been asked where everybody is, I said, well, I think we have some good teams out there and maybe one great team, but I'm not sure there's more than one great team. I don't know that I can put Georgia in a great team status yet. Maybe I will. but what I really think now is that there's 4 or 5 really good teams, and then everybody else. I think it's really amazingly um, level right now. The playing fields, not the playing fields, but the scores and where everybody is. And um, I had not seen Florida, and so I was very pleasantly surprised to see the Florida game and have it play out the way they did. And really, I think we were all hoping that Florida would get one more shot with the ball there in the last series, but Alabama wouldn't let them do it. The 2-point play, everybody was questioning. It looked like they got the back said, "I want it," and the quarterback saying, "I want it," and they couldn't get it out of there. And all of a sudden, they don't go in the end zone. But really good game. I think as I looked at Missouri's schedule earlier on, and I think on the show in Kansas City, I said this may be the easiest schedule they've had for a while. Well, all of a sudden that's got a lot harder, you know. And I think Boston College I would have put up there with one of those really tough games. Without the quarterback, I'm not so sure now. But you look now, A&M is going to be tough. Georgia, without question, is going to be tough. Florida and Arkansas now have become games. Arkansas especially. Sam Pittman has it rolling down there to beat up Texas the way he did, and so there's not really any givens out there anymore. So now all of a sudden that schedule looks a lot more difficult than what I thought before we started.
I wanted to ask you about Arkansas. They play Texas A&M this Saturday, and that game is in Dallas at the AT&T Dome. You've seen Texas A&M. Arkansas really pushed around Texas. Welcome to the SEC, Longhorns. What are your thoughts on that game?
On the Texas game?
Texas A&M, Arkansas.
A&M, Arkansas. Yeah. I've got the spreads here, and I was looking at that this morning, and I forgot what the spread is. Here it is. It's A&M by 5.5, or is it 5.5? Yeah, 5.5. I'll tell you what, A&M with the quarterback they're playing now, Card got hurt, or not Card, but King got hurt. The other kid really throws it well, but he doesn't see the field like King did. I think, I like Arkansas's chances in this game. I mean, A&M is really good on defense, and they're very physical. But knowing what I know about our team now, to hang with those guys and have a chance with them on the last series of the game, I just can't believe that Arkansas is not better than we are and can't win this game. So, and they've got it going. They have got they got great environment right now. They seem to have great team chemistry. They're sort of a team everybody likes to watch. They started watching them last year when Pittman started beating people, and I think everybody sort of fell in love with those guys. So I think Arkansas wins this game, but I'm under 500, guys, so don't make any bets based on me. I got to give you a full disclosure here.
Missouri against Kentucky. I was really impressed with Kentucky. In fact, even some people were saying, could they be the third best team in the SEC? Missouri, it was a very entertaining game. Tigers had a chance. Then Kentucky goes out last week and almost gets beat by Chattanooga. Do you know much about Kentucky? And they seem like they're really strong on the lines. A couple potential high draft picks on the offensive line, but just had an off day. I don't know.
I didn't really watch much. I did watch the Missouri game, and I don't know anything about Chattanooga, by the way. But that was a heck of a football game to watch if you weren't a fan of one team or the other. But they rushed for 340 yards on it, and that's our undoing. If that's cut in 2/3, you probably win the football game. So I think Kentucky's a real solid team, and I saw several of the national shows talking about that game, and everybody Stoops is sort of a favorite of everybody, and so they want him to do well. But I was impressed with Missouri's ability to come back. I almost turned it off when it went 28-14. I got up and got a cold glass of water, and came back and decided to go ahead and watch it. But it was really impressive. I thought how hard they fought back in that game. That says a lot about your quarterback and about your team, I think, when that happens.
Couple of topics I'd like to touch on before we get to questions. The name, image, and likeness that is now part of college football. Where do you see that going in the next few years, and how much is the game going to change?
Well, all that is unintended consequences, and nobody really knows. So it's sort of how you read the tea leaves and who I get to talk to. And I have had the opportunity to talk to a number of people about it. And I think, and again, this is my opinion, reading leaves and listening to other people. I think it's going to be about a 3-year flurry. And I haven't heard of any issues so far in locker rooms, but I don't think you really know until the end of the year and people start evaluating their teams and seeing why they didn't play well here or there. And then you can find out how much of it really affected. I don't think there's any way to tell right now because everybody's so aware that it could disrupt the locker rooms that they're working really hard to make sure it doesn't. And so that part of it, I don't think we're going to know yet, but I think it's going to be a flurry for about 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, I think the people that are running the players' organization are going to look at it and say, you know what? We got about 3% of our players that are doing really well. And then we got a whole bunch of kids that are getting absolutely nothing out of this. What's the answer to that? And I think the answer is going to be, and it's already been put out there in the universe, is when this group of players started the organization in the Pac-12, one of the demands they made last spring was they demanded revenue sharing. And so from the get-go, one of my sources had said, sooner or later, this is going to get to revenue sharing. Now, revenue sharing is this. It's like it is in Major League Baseball and NFL, is that players will demand a piece of all the gates and a piece of all the revenues to every university. Now, what that gets them is they all get a paycheck. Okay, they all get the same paycheck. It allows the 3% that are doing really well, making a lot of money. I say 3%, that's a guess, but 3%, 5%, whatever it is, the guys that are really making some dough, it lets them go ahead and continue to do that. But it now spreads that money out from the revenue that gets collected, whatever their percentage is going to be, and you got to figure it's going to be a pretty good piece, gets spread out to all the other players. You know, if you saw the guy that owns all the gyms in Miami that is giving every player on the Miami football team that's on scholarship $500 a month, you know what? The whole names, images, and likeness, I think that's the right idea. That's the right idea. And what this revenue sharing would do is it would give everybody more money or some money. Now, what's that do to colleges and what's it do to universities? I think the SEC sees this coming. I think their move to take Texas and Oklahoma was a move to create the largest revenue producing conference in the country, to be prepared for when revenue sharing does come down the pike. I can't tell you when it's going to be, but I think it's going to be in the next 5 years. When revenue sharing does become an issue and part of the whole deal, then the SEC is fully prepared to create enough revenue to keep the universities operating at the level they are now, but also to produce a revenue sharing situation where all their student athletes will receive money. Now, that will make it the most powerful and the most prestigious and the most, everybody's going to want to go to a conference that can do that. I think all the other conferences know this is coming. or at least now that the SEC's tipped them off. And I think that's what you're seeing with this alliance. I think the alliance, where the ACC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12 are going to play non-conference games with each other, create some familiarity, and find out who's of value and who isn't, so that if they have to go to one large super conference to offset or to compete with the SEC, then they're prepared to do it. But I think to get in those conferences or stay in those conferences, you're going to have to provide value. That means you've got to sell out. You probably have to have a stadium big enough. And 3, then it's going to be eyeballs. How many eyeballs does your team bring to the table to create revenue? So I can see this thing 10 years from now being a 40-team super conference, their own set of rules, revenue sharing. And then everybody else that's below those that are not in that, they have to decide how much, how they're going to handle the revenue sharing. Are they going to be able to produce enough? Is there going to be enough popularity amongst all those other programs to still produce enough revenue to pay players and also provide for all the expenses that they have? Will television be a part of it? You know, right now, there is so many people, they have such a popular base of people who want to watch college football. There may be enough TV money and enough out there to support all these programs. I don't know. I'll have to wait. You know, somebody will have to tell me about it because I may not be around. But that's where I sort of see it going as I read it, Mark.
What was your reaction when you heard Oklahoma and Texas were going to the SEC, and then subsequently with the 4 proposed additions to the Big 12?
I wasn't surprised at all. I think there could be more, but I wasn't surprised those 2 teams going in. I thought, as I looked at the whole Big 12 situation, I thought they ought to hang on and wait and see what happens over the next couple of years before they invited anybody. But I think that all these other conferences may be trying to enlarge. And so there was probably at least 3 of those teams that other leagues were going to chase. They were going to chase BYU. They always have. BYU just, you know, it's been a tough one because of not playing on Sundays, and they have their own national radio network, and how you share that. Cincinnati has become a player in the college football field, so I can see that. You know, UCF has become a player. Let's hope they stay that way. And then Houston, I think, I'm not sure. Houston it's been a battle back and forth between the Big 12 and Houston because the Texas schools did not want Houston in it. And now they're probably feel backed into a wall and decided to take them anyway. So it's, you know, I thought they should have hung around and gotten all the money they could out of Texas and Oklahoma, and then made sure that the teams they wanted were those teams.
Ready for a few questions from our?
Sure.
Last week, of course, Mizzou played SEMO. How does a major conference member balance the need to have home games and wins versus playing a game that won't be competitive?
Well, it's right now you can do that, and it's almost encouraged in the SEC. You see, you know, Mercer playing Alabama, and they're playing who they're playing Mississippi, Southern Miss this weekend, and so in the SEC, because they're only playing 8 conference games, it's almost like it's being encouraged. A lot of the other conferences that are playing 9, they don't have the liberty to do that. They don't have the freedom to do that. So I think it's a conference issue, but 2, I think it's really hard to coach in those games. It's really hard to get your kids to be totally respectful of their opponent and prepare the way they should play in those things. But at this point in time, and I say this point in time because how important I think non-conference games are going to become, I don't think you're going to see much more of this. I think you'll get through this year and maybe next year, but then after that, I think playoffs, and I'm not sure when the 12 is going to come about, or if it will, but I think it will. When that happens, you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have to play good opponents every week. And so that'll sort of take care of itself. But it's hard as a coach to do it. But you need wins. You absolutely need wins, because you got to have them to go to a bowl game. You can have one on your schedule, one victory. So why not take it, if you can?
How difficult is it for someone like Steve Wilkes to move from the pro ranks to college? Does it take a year or two to implement his scheme, recruit his players, etc.?
I don't know that I have an answer for that. The difficulty I always see is the guys going from the college level to the pros. Those are the ones we all hear about, the coaches that just don't make it. And there's lots of reasons for that. But, going from the NFL to the college situations, the toughest part, I think, is because you have a 20-hour limit as to how many hours you can work with your players and meet with your players in combination and have them in the weight room. I think that's just an absolute huge change for these guys. They don't get to teach their concepts, and maybe some of their concepts are more complicated because you have to be more complicated at that level, and you can be more complicated because you got great players and you've got time, and you're challenged by great schemes. So you've got to be pretty creative. You've got to be complicated at that level, and sound. And how much fundamentals you're really teaching at that NFL level, I don't know, because I haven't been there. But I know one thing in college, as football started to change, especially spread offenses and defense, the teaching of defensive players was so much harder. That and offensive linemen were the hardest two things that we found, was teaching secondary players, teaching kids the concepts of defenses. I know we struggle with kids coming from the high school level to the college level, and we were in college. So I would imagine Steve coming from the NFL down to the college level, he sees it. It's probably twice as recognizable to him, that the problems that he has as far as fundamentals go, as far as concepts that defensive players have to understand at the NFL level. I mean, I've heard NFL coaches complain year in and year out now about the players they're getting from the college level. So you can imagine making that move down to where now you have to go back and teach all the fundamentals. So I think that's part of it. The hours is critical. You can't teach all the things you want to teach in the limited time, all the things that he has to teach in the limited time that they give you on the college level.
This is a comment from one of our viewers. Really enjoy listening to you each week on 810, the best college football analysis in the country. And I would echo that. So we do enjoy it. It's every Wednesday morning on the Border Patrol and hosted by our good buddy, Stephen St. John, along with Nate Bucati. So Coach Drinkwitz is 1-4 on the road at Mizzou. Talk about the major difficulties of playing on the road in college football.
It's funny. I think it's sort of a mindset. In some ways, I always felt like it is sort of a little easier to play on the road because the distractions aren't there. You don't have to take care of tickets. You don't have to see your mom and dad before and afterwards, or your girl, both girlfriends. You can't have to balance that on the road. In some ways, it's just the guys that are going to play that are going with you. And so I don't know. My approach was that the road wasn't a big deal. And fortunately, probably once my career matured, I was pretty efficient on the road. I'd start the Monday, the first meeting we had, and I would play the fight song of whoever we were going to play. And I'd play it the entire meeting. and I would play it really loud. So when I talked, they had to really listen to what I was doing. And so I'd start training them during the week. And then we played it at practice. And then we played it at the meeting the next day. And then at practice the next day. And so by the time we went to Michigan, everybody was so sick of the Michigan fight song. And they'd been forced to listen and pay attention with all that noise and all that distraction, that we sort of trained them during the week for that. And I know every time we're going to play on the road, the guys will go, oh boy, here we go. We're going to get a lot of music this week and a lot of loudness. And say, yep, you are. So, I don't know. I made that as much of a game, getting them ready, as I did the game itself. So that was just my approach. I'm not sure how everybody else approaches it. I think it's one of those things that it's like the altitude here. If you put a sign up and says you're playing at 5,270 feet, be aware of the dangers of altitude sickness. They look like dizziness, your stomach gets upset. Then all of a sudden those people get dizzy and they get upset, their stomachs get upset, and they're worried about altitude sickness. So I sort of think it's the same thing about going on the road. And especially if you lose a couple on the road and somebody says, we're on the road, you go, oh my gosh. I think it's part of it. And you've got a game plan for your home games. So have a game plan for your away games to sort of get your guys used to it. Now, does that answer all you're still going to play maybe better teams and they're going to play better at home, but at least, you don't have the road issue itself being a problem. You got the team being a problem.
Just as an aside, in your coaching days, what was the toughest atmosphere you ever played in?
My coaching days, in the Big Ten, Wisconsin, Iowa, Ohio State were the toughest. In the Big 12, I thought Oklahoma was tough. And that was the toughest, I think, when I was in the Big 12. I'm trying to think back. Nebraska was a great environment. I mean, if you appreciate college football and fans, they're so respectful. I mean, those big crowds like that, they don't bother you because they're so respectful, and they're into the game. But the places where you got harassed the most, I didn't like playing at Texas Tech. I usually try to get sick that week and send my other coaches out, but they were harassing. But Iowa, in Iowa, they've got a pink locker room. The urinals are pink, the showers are pink, the stools are pink, the sinks are pink. And so that was always an issue. We'd all call each other and say, how you went on the road and you played well against them. When you look at their home record, it's unbelievable at Iowa. It's over 80%. You go, how do you do it? What do you do? So when I went there one year, I painted our entire locker room pink at home. And so on Monday, the players walked in, they came over to my office and said, what the heck is going on here? I said, well, I want you to feel at home when you get there. So we painted our locker room pink, everything pink. So when they walked off the bus, it was like they were going in their own locker room again. So, but those were the hardest environments.
Did you win that game?
We did 38-14, I think.
Coach, how do you explain two dramatic turnarounds? Arkansas struggled for many, many years. Now they're ranked. Florida State has fallen precipitously in just a couple of years.
Well, I never try to put too much credit on the shoulders of a coach on these changes, but more instability. But I think Sam Pittman is the right guy at the right time in the right place. Now, he coached there before. He knew where the bones were buried. He had a decent group of players, but I think in this case, Sam Pittman at Arkansas has been the difference. Now they've always had a recruiting base, and most of it's in Texas, but you're also close to Louisiana, and so there's lots of players And, you're close to Mississippi and Alabama. So there's lots of players available to you. They just hadn't gotten their share. So I think just Sam Pittman is just the right guy at the right time. And I'll stop there. You look, and it's just the opposite at Florida State. How many coaches have they gone through now? 3 or 4 in the last 7 years? You don't get a chance. Stability is so important. And, once you start changing coaches and you start, every time it happens, we've changed coaches 3 times here. We changed 3 times in 3 years at Colorado. Well, every time you change, the new coach coming in's got all these things he wants to put up in the locker room. So you got to take all the other guys down. All the new stuff goes up. Well, after a while, you don't know what's important. Was the guy, things that the first guy said, were those important? And if they're not important, if they are, why is this guy changing them to this? So stability. Anytime you've got instability, you have got very little chance of being successful. And I think that's Florida State's issue. I just think they have not been stable, and they probably made a poor coaching choice in there along the way. I don't ever like to say that, but probably the guy that didn't fit as well. And the hot name at the time may not be the right fit, and search firms don't take that into consideration.
Speaking of coaching changes, the next question relates to the USC situation. Your thoughts on that? I just couldn't believe they fired a guy the second week of the season. But who do you think? What do you think of that situation, and who might be their next coach?
Well, I think some of this is political. This year is when the TV rights negotiations start for the Pac-12 at the end of the year. And so the conference has got to create, however it can, as many teams that make the spotlight and can stay in the spotlight as possible, because that means they're going to get more money. If they have very few teams that are showing up, and the eyeballs aren't as much as other places, and there's not a couple of hot teams and consistent teams, they need 8 teams in that conference, maybe 10, but they need 8 teams to really be visible and really playing well to impact those negotiations. So I think the conference and SC both knew that they were going to struggle the rest of the year because of their own fan base more than anything else, but because of the identity of SC, and they needed to somehow change it so that at the end of this year, SC is a viable product and a viable team in that conference and a viable national team. They didn't think they could do it with Clay Helton. They've been trying to get rid of Clay Helton for 4 or 5 years. And I think that the guy that is now the interim has got a real chance to stay there. He can win 9 games. SC can be a 10 or 11 game winning program, maybe 12 this year. And I think both the conference and the athletic director felt enough pressure to get them viable this year. And they both felt like it couldn't happen with Clay, and they had to make a move. So I don't know who's going to get the job. Luke Fickell, I can't see him leaving the Midwest. Now he's going in the Big 12. He's going to win more games there, have less headaches. I think, the guy at Penn State, James Franklin, maybe, but he's, Penn State's as good a place as any to be, and he's from Pennsylvania. So I don't know who's going to make that move out there, but I do believe that the existing interim coach has got as good a chance as anybody.
Gary, I want to ask you, with all the dynamics in coaching today and coaches getting fired on early in the season and NIL and everything, do you miss being on the sidelines if it was in today's game?
Well, being on the sidelines is probably the easiest part of the job. I think what happens is when I've been away from it as long as I have, and I look at it all, I go, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming what those guys have to do. But when you're in it, you know, and you're solving problems day by day, and every day different problems are coming up, you're used to that. Then I think you could handle it. And yes, I would miss it. I do miss it. Sideline. I don't just miss the sideline. I miss the problem solving. I miss all the guys getting together and trying to come up with schemes and the whole milieu, to tell you the truth. I even like recruiting. But if you were in it, and these things aren't all of a sudden popping up, they've been out there and you would know. A lot of these teams already had a plan. It's not like they just popped it on them overnight. So when you're in the middle of it, it's just one of the day by day stuff that you're looking to work on. So it would be easier to do. As we look at from here, from where we sit, and it just looks overwhelming and crazy. But once you were in it, you know, you'd find ways to make it work.
How much bigger are the support staffs today than when you were coaching?
Probably 4 times bigger.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, we were in a world where we had 2 graduate assistants, and that was it. I mean, my last year, they let us go to 3 graduates. We didn't have any analysts. We didn't have any volunteer guys. We didn't have any of these guys that just look at film. We didn't have anybody in player development. We didn't have any of those things. So your group gets bigger, which means, you know, you can get more done. You can do more things. Sometimes you can do too much. You know, how much information can you really process? How much information can 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids really process and get in 20 hours a week? So I think it's good and bad. You mean you always wanted more help, but you could have too many people too. And so I'm not sure it's a plus, but there's a lot of coaches that have gone back, that have been fired, gone back to work for Nick. Nick's taught them his process. They've all come out of there, and most of them been successful, and they get a new life. They reinvent themselves. That part of it I like. I like the fact that coaches can go reinvent themselves in places, stay in the game, not have to leave the business. But budgets, money demands because of those things are just overwhelming. What people are getting paid and how much programs are having to pay that number of people. Fortunately, there's great TV money, and the SEC, of course, has best or second best that there is.
I'm going to wrap it up, put you on the spot, pick a winner from Mizzou, Boston College, and then also your 4 teams for the college football playoff.
Okay, well, I don't have any problem. Missouri's going to win this game. They're a better football team. They're two-dimensional. They just, and I know they're working hard to figure out how to stop the run, and I think they'll get that done. So I think they're a 14-point favorite going into this game, to tell you the truth. The 4 teams in the college football playoff right now, I'd have to say I think Georgia would be one of them. I think that Alabama looks to be one of those teams. And I think they probably will. I don't think Clemson's going to make it. I don't think Oklahoma's going to make it. I don't think they're one of the best 10 football teams in the country right now. I don't think there's anybody in that Big 12 that probably is. I think that Michigan may be better than anybody thinks. And I think Penn State is probably as good as anybody. I don't think there's Oregon as a Pac-12 school very well could make it. And so I think there's 2 SEC teams. I think that there'll be a Big Ten team there, and I think there'll be a Pac-12 team. I think Oregon will be the Pac-12. I don't know about between Michigan and Penn State who's going to be the team there, but I think it's going to be one of those 2 teams.
All right, Gary, we always appreciate your expert analysis. You're the best, and taking the time to meet with us every year. And next year, see you at the flea market, I hope.
See you at the flea market. Great being with you guys. Always love being here.
All right, as we wrap up, again, we want to remind you of the Alumni Association Tiger Tailgate this Saturday, and the auction for the Tiger Tailgate is open. So go online to the Mizzou Alumni Association website, and you can link up to that. Next week, our guest will be Soren Petro, who's host of the program each afternoon on 810. He is always a great guest, and we'll have lots of thoughts, I'm sure, about the Chiefs and the Tigers and everything else Kansas City. And also just found out, thanks to Paul Blackman, that we will have head coach Conzo Martin as our guest on Tuesday, October 19th. So make sure you put that on your calendar. Again, tell your friends to watch this on YouTube and make sure you sign up for membership in the Tiger Club Kansas City. We really need it. Again, that website is kctigerclub.com, and you can follow us on Twitter at KC Tiger Club. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day, and we'll see you next Tuesday.